"You're not his," they mocked the 15-year-old black girl, but she silenced the engineers by fixing the engine in minutes. "Are you sure she knows the difference between a wrench and a screwdriver?" asked Chief Engineer Marcus Thompson, loud enough for everyone in the Peterson Motors workshop to hear, including Jasmine Williams, who was waiting her turn in the internship program for young people from disadvantaged communities. The 15-year-old girl stood motionless, watching the 5 engineers who laughed discreetly as they reviewed his resume. His clean but visibly worn overalls contrasted sharply with the impeccable uniforms of the high-performance engine company's technical staff. "Let me guess," Thompson continued, flipping through the papers dismissively. "Another social quota who's going to spend 3 days here pretending to understand something about engineering, take some pictures for the company's Instagram, and then go back to, well, wherever these people go." Dr. Rebecca Morrison, the program director, cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Marcus, maybe we should give her a chance." "A chance?" Thompson interrupted, pointing to the dismantled V8 engine in the center of the workshop. "That machine is probably worth more than her house. This is no place for games." Jasmine Williams never imagined that her first real opportunity to show her skills would come wrapped in such contempt. The daughter of a mechanic who died when she was only 12, she had spent the last 3 years helping her grandfather in his small suburban workshop, learning about engines since she could hold a tool. Her hands, despite her young age, already bore small scars from countless hours working with metal parts and hot oil. But there, under those fluorescent lights and condescending glances, her skills seemed invisible. "You know what we're going to do," Thompson announced with a cruel smile. "We're going to give our special visitor a little practical test. Jerry, bring in that engine that's been giving us trouble for 2 weeks. The '87 Mustang." An assistant wheeled in a partially disassembled engine, clearly in need of complex maintenance. "This one has a problem with the fuel injection system that even our most experienced guys haven't been able to solve yet," Thompson explained. "How about taking a look, little one?" The other engineers exchanged amused glances. It was obvious that this was a humiliating trap, an engine with problems so complex that even professionals couldn't solve them being offered as a test to a teenager. Jasmine approached slowly, his eyes scanning every detail of the machine in front of her. For a brief moment, something changed in her expression, an almost supernatural calm, as if she recognized an old friend in the midst of that hostile environment. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a confidence that made Thompson frown. "Why are you afraid?" he taunted, crossing his arms. There, in front of all the contemptuous stares, Jasmine stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Her hands were already moving instinctively toward the tools, as if each part of that engine were whispering stories that only she could hear. If this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity touched his heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a revolution that no one would ever forget. What happened in the next few minutes turned a simple provocation into something much more sinister. Thompson wasn't just testing Jasmine's technical skills, he was orchestrating a public spectacle of racial humiliation that would be remembered by everyone present. "Jerry, turn on the camera," Thompson ordered his assistant, pointing to the recording equipment the company used to document procedures. "I want to record this historic moment. The first time anyone, like this, has tried to work on real equipment here at Peterson Motors." Dr. Morrison tried to intervene again. "Marcus, this is going too far." "Too far?" He interrupted, her voice laden with feigned indignation. "Rebecca, you brought this girl here promising diversity and inclusion. I'm just giving her exactly what you asked for, a real opportunity to show what she's capable of." The other engineers, David Chun, Robert Martinez, and Paul Williams, remained in awkward silence. Some looked away, clearly uncomfortable, but none had the courage to confront their boss. Institutional cowardice was in full swing. Jasmine stood motionless in front of the engine, her hands still untouched by a single tool. Inside, memories of his father flooded her mind like a devastating emotional torrent. James Williams had been more than a mechanic. He was an artist who transformed broken metal into perfect machines. On weekends, when the official workshop was closed, he would take Jasmine to his small shed behind the house, where he taught her the secrets he had learned in 20 years of working with high-performance engines. "Listen first, little one," he used to say, placing her hand on the hood of a running car. "Engines speak to those who know how to listen. Every noise, every vibration tells a different story. When James died in a work accident, ironically, while repairing the car of a white executive who refused to pay for proper service at a real garage, Jasmine promised herself she would honor everything he had taught her. "Can I start?" she finally asked, her voice breaking the tense silence. Thompson let out a cruel laugh. "Sure, princess. But I'm warning you, when you fail and you will fail, I want you to publicly acknowledge that this place is not for people like he." "People like me?" Jasmine repeated, slowly turning to face him. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Thompson replied, crossing his arms. "This company has tradition, standards, excellence. We're not his NGO for social projects." What Thompson didn't notice was the subtle change that happened at that moment. Jasmine tilted her head slightly to the side, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time since she had arrived, an almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was the same smile his father used to give when someone doubted his abilities, calm, confident, almost amused. A smile that carried decades of knowledge passed down through calloused hands and nights spent deciphering the most complex mechanical mysteries. "Very well," she said softly, walking toward the tool bench. "But when I'm done, you promise to publicly acknowledge that you were wrong?" The engineers exchanged surprised glances. Was the girl really proposing a bet? Thompson laughed even louder. "His girl, if you can even identify what's wrong with this engine, I'll personally write a letter of recommendation to any college he wants." "What if I not only identify it, but completely solve the problem?" asked Jasmine, choosing tools with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. "Impossible," Thompson declared categorically. "But if by some miracle that happens, I'll publish an official apology on the company's channels acknowledging that I underestimated her abilities." Dr. Morrison watched the scene with growing concern. He had known Marcus Thompson for years. He would never make a bet he wasn't absolutely sure he would win. That particular engine had stumped some of the company's best technicians for weeks. It was a cruel trap disguised as an opportunity. Jasmine approached the engine with deliberate, confident movements. First, he simply stood there, looking, his eyes scanning each component as if reading a familiar book. Then, without touching anything, he leaned in and listened. The shed fell completely silent, everyone watching that black teenager do something that none of the engineers present had thought to do: treat that machine as a living being that had a story to tell. After 2 minutes of silent analysis, Jasmine finally spoke. "Problem with the electronic injection system. Throttle position sensor out of calibration, causing improper mixture. But that's just a symptom." Thompson frowned. It was exactly the diagnosis his technicians had arrived at after days of analysis. "Anyone with basic knowledge could come to that conclusion," he said, but her voice had lost some of her previous arrogance. "True," she agreed, picking up a specific wrench. "But I bet no one identified that the real problem is in the wiring harness. Oxidation on connectors 12 and 15, causing intermittent resistance that confuses the control module." Every new technician who had worked on that engine had focused on the obvious sensor, completely ignoring the possibility of an underlying electrical problem. It was the kind of diagnosis that required not only technical knowledge, but intuition developed through years of practical experience. The silence in the shed became almost deafening. Thompson looked at his colleagues, seeking some kind of confirmation that this girl was just making lucky guesses. But the technical accuracy of the diagnosis was undeniable. Every word that she uttered corresponded exactly to the problems they had documented in internal reports that she could never have seen. It was as if she could see through the metal and cables, straight to the heart of the problems that had baffled experienced professionals. As everyone watched in disturbed silence, Jasmine began to work with fluid, precise movements, her hands dancing among the tools as if each part of that engine were a natural extension of his own fingers. What none of us knew was that this confidence was not luck or natural talent. It was the result of countless nights in his father's shed, solving problems far more complex than anything Peterson Motors could imagine, using improvised tools and creativity born of necessity. Every calculated move she made was fueled by something much more powerful than technical knowledge. It was the living memory of a man who had died defending his professional dignity, and now her daughter was about to prove that his legacy was stronger than any institutional prejudice. Jasmine's first 15 minutes of work transformed the workshop environment into something almost supernatural. Every movement of her hands was calculated, precise, as if she were performing a choreography that she had rehearsed thousands of times in her imagination. Thompson continued his sarcastic comments, but now there was a note of nervousness in her voice. "Look, guys," She really believes she can do it. How cute. But her eyes couldn't look away from Jasmine's hands, which worked with disturbing competence. Marcus, Dr. Morrison approached discreetly. Maybe we should give her a real chance to show. A real chance. Thompson interrupted, raising his voice deliberately. Rebecca, this girl is tinkering with a $50,000 engine like it's a toy. When she breaks apart, it will be her. Jerry Chun, the youngest technical assistant on the team, watched in fascination. There was something about the way Jasmine handled the tools that reminded he of his own most experienced mentors. Boss, he murmured discreetly, she really seems to know what she's doing. Shut up, Jerry, Thompson growled. You have 3 years of experience. You're not qualified to give an opinion on anything. What Thompson didn't realize was that his own arrogance was being meticulously documented. Dr. Morrison, uncomfortable with the situation from the start, had discreetly begun recording everything on her cell phone. As director of the diversity program, she had faced similar situations before and learned to protect herself legally. Jasmine removed the main electric whip with fluid movements. When she exposed the suspicious connectors, an involuntary murmur ran through the engineers present. The oxidation was exactly where she had predicted, hidden in a place none of the technicians had thought to check. Impressive luck, Thompson commented, but her voice had lost some of her previous confidence. It's not luck, said a voice behind him. Everyone turned to see Mike Rodriguez, senior maintenance supervisor at Peterson Motors, who had arrived quietly during the last few minutes. Mike was a legend in the company, 40 years of experience, responsible for training half of the technicians on the West Coast. Sorry to interrupt, Mike continued, his eyes fixed on Jasmine, but I got a call that someone was finally getting the '87 Mustang fixed. Thompson forced a smile. Mike, we just let the girl from the social program play around a little. Nothing serious. Play around. Mike walked over to the engine, examining Jasmine's work. Thompson, in 40 years of working with engines, I've seen maybe 6 people diagnose wiring harness oxidation with a visual inspection. And how old is this little girl? 15, Jasmine replied softly, without stopping her work. Mike nodded slowly. 15. And she can already see problems that our experienced engineers took weeks to fail to identify. The tension in the room was palpable. Thompson tried to regain control of the situation. Mike, with all due respect, she probably got lucky or what? Mike interrupted, her voice laden with decades of technical authority. Thompson, how many high-performance V8 engines have you personally repaired? The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone at Peterson Motors knew that Thompson, despite his title of chief engineer, was primarily an administrator. Her practical experience was limited to signing reports and approving budgets. That's not the point, Thompson stammered, clearly uncomfortable. That's exactly the point, Mike retorted. You're humiliating a girl who demonstrates more technical competence in 15 minutes than some of his engineers demonstrate in months. Jasmine continued working, but inside, an emotional storm was brewing. Mike's words echoed the lessons his father had engraved in her memory. Competence speaks louder than prejudice, but only when you have the opportunity to demonstrate it. There was something else that no one there knew. For the past 3 years, since his father's death, Jasmine had not only helped her grandfather in her small workshop. She had secretly taken online courses in automotive engineering, studied advanced technical manuals, and even participated in specialized forums where she discussed complex problems with professionals from across the country. But the deepest secret was another. James Williams, his father, had not been just an ordinary mechanic. Before opening his own workshop, he had worked for 5 years at Peterson Motors itself as a specialist technician, until he was fired due to restructuring, a euphemism for Thompson's arrival as chief engineer and his policy of professionalizing the team. The irony of the situation was almost poetic. Thompson was trying to humiliate the daughter of his man he had fired out of prejudice almost 4 years earlier, without even realizing the connection. Mike, Jasmine said softly, without looking up from the engine, did you know my father? Mike stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing. His father? What do you mean? James Williams. He worked here from 2018 to 2021. The silence that followed was so deep that the only audible sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Mike turned pale, her hands trembling slightly. Jesus Christ, he muttered, looking directly at Thompson. Jesus Christ, Marcus. You know who her father is. Thompson frowned, clearly confused. Why would that be relevant? James Williams was the best technician this company ever had, Mike declared, his voice growing in intensity. He solved problems that engineers with PhDs couldn't even diagnose. And you fired her because you thought she didn't fit the professional image of the company. Dr. Morrison continued to record discreetly, realizing that he was documenting something much bigger than simple racial discrimination. He was capturing the unfolding of a historic injustice. Jasmine finally looked up from the engine, staring directly at Thompson. My father told me about you, Mr. Thompson. How you came here with your degrees and your arrogance, firing people who knew more about engines than her ever would. That's completely irrelevant, Thompson stammered, but now there was sweat on her forehead. Is it? Asked Jasmine, her voice calm but laden with something that made everyone present pay attention. Because it seems to me that you have a pattern. Humiliating people you consider unsuitable for his perfect company. Mike looked at the engine, then at Jasmine, then at Thompson. Marcus, if this girl is James Williams' daughter, then you just made the biggest mistake of his career. Why? Thompson asked, clearly confused. Because James Williams didn't just fix engines, Mike explained slowly. He improved them. He created solutions that no engineering manual teaches. And if half of what he knew has been passed on to this girl. Jasmine smiled for the first time since she had arrived. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of recognition. It was the same smile that his father used to give when he was about to prove that competence has no color, age, or social class. The engine is almost ready, she announced softly. But before we test it, I need to do one last check. Her hands moved to a component that none of the engineers had even noticed. Did you check the calibration of the injection module? Jerry Chen quickly consulted his notes. Of course we did. It was the first thing we... No, Jasmine interrupted gently. You checked the obvious parameters. I asked about the altitude calibration. Absolute silence. Altitude calibration? Thompson repeated, her voice showing that he had no idea what she was talking about. Mike started laughing, not out of amusement, but out of astonishment. My God. Marcus, you really don't know, do you? Know what? This engine came from Denver, Mike explained slowly. Altitude 1,600 meters. The injection parameters are calibrated for the atmospheric pressure there, not sea level. That's why none of our diagnostics worked completely. That's when everyone in the room realized they weren't just witnessing an engine repair. They were watching a 15-year-old girl demonstrate a level of technical knowledge that exposed the incompetence of an entire team of trained engineers. Jasmine adjusted the parameters with precise movements, each command typed with the confidence of someone who had learned not only theory but intuition. Her hands worked as extensions of her mind, guided by the memory of countless nights in his father's shed, where real problems were solved with creativity and deep knowledge. Done, she finally announced, closing the hood of the electronic module. Now you can start the engine. Thompson looked around, searching for some way to maintain control of the situation. What if it doesn't work? It will work, Jasmine replied with a serenity that made everyone present realize that it was not hope or blind confidence. It was the absolute certainty of someone who completely mastered what he was doing. Mike held the ignition key, his eyes meeting Jasmine's. Young lady, if this engine works perfectly, you have just proven something that goes far beyond technical skill. What does it prove? Asked Dr. Morrison, still recording. That real competence doesn't come from diplomas or titles, Mike replied, inserting the key. It comes from passion, dedication, and respect for knowledge passed down through generations. Under the weight of all those eyes, some hopeful, some fearful, all intensely curious, Jasmine stood firm, like someone carrying on the legacy of a man who had died defending the dignity of his work. But anyone watching closely would notice that it wasn't just confidence shining in her eyes, it was the quiet anticipation of someone about to rewrite not just the history of an engine, but an entire company's perception of what true technical excellence means. Mike turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life with a smoothness that made everyone in the shed fall silent. There was no hesitation, no glitches, no irregular noises that had plagued the technicians for weeks. It was the pure sound of a machine running in perfect harmony. Thompson turned pale as a ghost. That's impossible, he stammered, approaching the engine as if he were seeing a ghost. Impossible. Mike repeated, turning off the engine and staring directly at Thompson. Marcus, this 15-year-old girl solved in 40 minutes a problem that her team of experienced engineers couldn't solve in 3 weeks. Dr. Morrison continued recording, realizing she was documenting a historic moment. Jasmine, she said softly, could you explain exactly what you did? Jasmine wiped her hands on a rag, her voice calm and educational. The problem wasn't just the throttle sensor. It was a combination of 3 factors: oxidation on connectors 12 and 15, incorrect altitude calibration, and an intermittent fault in the control module that only manifested itself under specific temperature conditions. Jerry Chen looked at her notes, then at Thompson. Boss, we didn't even check the altitude calibration. We didn't even know the engine came from Denver. And why should we have known? Thompson exploded, completely losing his composure. That's information that should be in the report. It was, Mike said coldly, walking over to a filing cabinet and pulling out a folder. Page 3 of the initial report. Engine sourced from Denver, Colorado dealership. Altitude 1, 600 m. Signed by you on March 15th. The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson had signed the report without reading it, blindly relying on his hierarchical position to mask his technical incompetence. That doesn't prove anything, Thompson muttered, but her voice had lost all authority. It doesn't prove anything? Mike opened a new folder. Marcus, how many engines has his team personally repaired this year? I don't need to prove my credentials to anyone, Thompson retorted, but beads of sweat were visible on his forehead. 17, Mike announced, reading from the documents. 17 engines repaired by the engineering team in 12 months. Do you know how many James Williams repaired alone per month when he worked here? Jasmine remained silent, but her eyes shone with a mixture of pain and pride. 23, Mike continued. James Williams repaired 23 engines per month. Alone. And you fired him because you thought he didn't have the right qualifications. Dr. Morrison approached Jasmine. Sweetheart, how long have you been working with engines? Since I was 8, Jasmine replied. His father taught him that an engine is like a person, you have to understand what it's feeling before you can try to help it. Thompson tried one last desperate gambit. Look, this is all very touching, but a teenager fixing an engine doesn't change the fact that this company has standards. Standards. Mike's voice cut through the air like a knife. Marcus, you want to talk about standards? Mike walked over to his computer and projected a screen onto the wall. These are the engineering team's efficiency rates over the last 5 years. Do you know when they started to drop? The downward curve on the graph began exactly in 2021, the year James Williams was fired. And these, Mike continued, switching screens, are the rework costs. Engines that came back with the same problems unresolved. The numbers were devastating. The company had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in warranties and rework since Thompson took full control of the technical team. You fired the best technicians we had and replaced them with people who know theory but don't understand engines, Mike declared. And now the daughter of one of them shows up here and solves in minutes what his qualified engineers couldn't do in weeks. Jerry Chen, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. Boss, maybe we should recognize that. Shut up. Thompson exploded, completely losing control. All of you. I will not accept being humiliated by a what, Marcus? Mike asked, her voice low and dangerous. The silence that followed was deadly. Thompson realized he had walked to the edge of a professional precipice from which there would be no return. Dr. Morrison raised his cell phone. Marcus, just to be clear, you've been on tape for the last 20 minutes. As director of the diversity program, I am required to report any incident of discrimination. Thompson's face went through several shades of red. Rebecca, you can't. I can and I will, she replied firmly. And this recording will be forwarded directly to Human Resources and the Board of Directors. Jasmine watched the whole scene with a calmness that impressed everyone. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the dignity of generations. Mr. Thompson, his father always said that competence has no color. Today I discovered that incompetence doesn't either. It was the final blow. Simple, elegant, devastating. Mike began to laugh, not out of humor, but out of pure admiration. 40 years working here, and I've never seen anyone so completely unmasked by a teenager. Thompson looked around desperately, searching for some ally, some way to regain control. But all the looks he encountered carried the same message: his reign of incompetence and prejudice had come to an end. "Jasmine," said Dr. Morrison, "on behalf of Peterson Motors, I would like to offer you a full scholarship in automotive engineering, with a paid internship here at the company." "And I," added Mike, "would like to offer you a part-time senior technician position, for when you're ready." As the offers piled up and Thompson remained silent and humiliated, Jasmine stood firm, carrying on the legacy of a man who had died defending his professional dignity. But there was something in her eyes that suggested that the real transformation was just beginning, not just for she, but for an entire company that was about to rediscover what true technical excellence guided by respect and competence means, regardless of color or origin. 6 months later, Peterson Motors had become a national case study on corporate transformation. Jasmine Williams, now a part-time senior technician while pursuing a full scholarship in engineering, had implemented new protocols that reduced rework costs by 73%. Her team of young technicians from underserved communities was solving problems that had baffled engineers for decades. Thompson? Fired a week after the incident. Dr. Morrison's video went viral with over 2 million views under the title "Chief Engineer Humiliated by 15-Year-Old." No company in the automotive industry would hire him after that. "Competence has no color, age, or diploma," Jasmine said during a lecture at the National Automotive Engineering Conference, where she was invited as a keynote speaker. His father always said that engines talk to those who know how to listen. The problem is that some people spend so much time talking about their qualifications that they forget to listen. Mike Rodriguez, now technical director, transformed the company into a model of real inclusion, not performative, but results-based. "James Williams would be proud," he murmured, watching Jasmine train the new class of interns. The final irony? The engine Jasmine repaired that day became the prototype for a new line of hybrid engines that generated millions in contracts. Each part carried a small plaque, dedicated to the memory of James Williams, exceptional technician. Thompson tried to sue the company for wrongful termination, but lost when his own recorded comments were presented as evidence. Today he works selling insurance over the phone, a fall he built himself, brick by brick of prejudice. The best revenge was not to destroy those who had wronged him, it was to build something bigger than he could ever have imagined. Jasmine proved that real competence does not come from titles, but from passion, dedication, and respect for knowledge passed down through generations. If this story of overcoming adversity touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes justice just needs the right opportunity to shine.